Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. So I was a young boy when this film came out, and this is one of those great 70s films that created a real buzz. I never had the opportunity to see it, of course, but we all knew the imagery so well. It was one of those films where the folklore was so vivid and it was a real phenomenon. I was scared of it because the hype around it made something about the whole thing feel real. I'm not sure any film has this power these days. I didn't see it until later in life, and the reason for this is I generally don't like horror films and I just always avoided it. But I saw it about 20 years ago and I did enjoy it, but it has been a while since I saw it. The 50-year anniversary this year and the re-release of it was a good excuse to watch it again. Okay, so where do I start? I have a lot to say about this film. Overall, I find it an absolutely stunning work in a number of ways. It's truly epic. That said, I do have a couple of issues with it, which I'll come to at the end. From the opening sequence in Iraq, I was absolutely hooked. It has such an epic feel to it. The immediate kind of feel and look of 1970s cinema at its very best. The sounds, the lights, the amazing orange sky. It almost gave it kind of an epic look of like 2001 A Space Odyssey or Apocalypse Now. It feels well at home in that company. The film is full of light and dark contrasts, and the sound design is really original. It's chaotic, scary noises at times, contrasted with silence at other times, and it's really unsettling. There's an amazing scene early on in an office where a loud ticking clock stops ticking and you really feel this silence. The Von Sydow character walks over to it to investigate, and the sound is almost silent except for the tiniest squeak of his shoe. There's something so exquisite about the way this is done. It's very early in the film, and I think it sensitized me to quiet sounds, which then made the chaos of the demon much more striking. The film isn't afraid to let the story evolve. The characters slowly build up. The cinematography choices are so interesting. There's no close-ups. There's not really any intimacy in this film. It's like we're always slightly set back as an observer with a bit of distance to the action in the film. I think that maybe this made it more likely that we feel like we are an observer that may actually be there standing in the room. There's a wonderful shot when Reagan attacks the psychiatrist and he falls to the floor on his back. As he falls, he has a camera attached to him, so the distance from the camera to him remains constant while the floor comes up towards us. It had the same effect on me, this, as the dolly zoom shot in Vertigo. When it's one of those shots that you have to keep watching it to work out what's happening when you see it for the first time. Again, this was another exquisite moment. And of course, the iconic shot of when the exorcist arrives at the house. The mist, the light, his silhouette. It's such an iconic single frame image that you see on posters. However, as a sequence in the film, it's a real moment. We know that the great actor Max von Sydow is in the film because it opens with him, but we don't see him for a long time. And when he turns up, it's the shot of the film, I think, both in terms of how it looks and as a dramatic moment in the film. Talking of dramatic moments, at one level, this is just fantastic storytelling. The story's really interesting and so unique. It's so scary and unsettling. It's extremely unpleasant, but in a way that doesn't feel out of place with the theme of this film. It's not an action movie, but at times it has a feeling of one. It's like we do have this big climax battle between the good guys and the bad guys, and the two priests going up the stairs together for the final encounter. It's incredible and so exciting, and there's kind of courage and tension and faith, but it's not a crash bang wallop action film. It's much more subtle than that. It is a horror film, but it's so much more. The large role played by the detective investigating the murder of the film director kind of makes it like a thriller at times. Apart from being just a great film, it feels like this film has so many layers and possible meanings. So it was set in the post-Watergate, post-Vietnam era, where it plays, I think, on anxieties about evil in the system and the fact that the people in charge don't have the answer. It's beyond the doctors, and it seems to be beyond even the priests. This is scary as it taps into a terrible fear that no one is really in charge. There's a lot about the medical profession, I think, the kind of arrogance of the doctors, the feeling that they have to have an answer, and the confidence with which the doctor explains what's happening in Reagan's brain. I think there's also something about psychotherapy here, the issue of split personality. When the psychiatrist is speaking to the person inside Reagan, it made me think of transactional analysis, doing therapy around the different personalities within. I think there's also something about medication here. We see this in the old people's home where people are just basically drugged up, and Reagan is treated with heavy duty sedatives. She's only 12, but she's already treated for anxiety. I think there's also something about adolescence and the parental fear of children rebelling in a way that was perhaps new in the 60s and 70s, the kind of hippie, rock, punk, drug culture. And then, of course, we have the religious aspects of the film. And there really is a possession here. It's not just a metaphor, although it works as a metaphor too. There's two real priests that played two of the priests in the film, and I love this. It gives the film an extra edge. The book apparently has more explicit religious elements, and Friedkin didn't want this included in the film. He excluded some of the theological discussions, which for me would have added something really good and interesting. However, it still works. It kind of makes it more ambiguous, perhaps more universal. It's not religious, but it is. Friedkin said afterwards that he thinks the film was better for being made by an atheist. You know what? I'm not sure I agree, although it's hard to imagine the film being made by anyone else at this point. But I am intrigued by what a person who believes in God could have done with this film. Maybe it would have been even more radical to have a believer working on something that's so potentially blasphemous for believers. The vulgarity and distastefulness of the language in some of the scenes must have seemed extremely blasphemous for traditional Christians at the time. But if you're a Christian and you believe in the devil, this is what such a figure would be capable of. The brilliance of the film is that it works whether you're an atheist or believer, I think. I mentioned that I do have some negative points to raise. I do think that it can be read as a very gendered and sexist film. It's the women that have the problems, and it's the men that save the day. The absence of Regan's father is also emphasised several times, so perhaps there's a bit of a kind of morality tale about the negative impact of single parenting. Of course, it's perhaps a sign of the time in which it was made. If it was made today, it would be easy to correct this, for example, by making one of the priests female. I did find the detective a little bit unconvincing as a character. At times he felt a little bit of a caricature, almost a bit Columbo-like, which didn't fit with the tone of the film. I also thought that there were times when the demon's speech just sounded plain silly. That said, I did think that some of the noises that came out of the demon were really good and creative and imaginative. It wasn't all bad. I watched the documentary The Fear of God made for the 25th anniversary of the film. This is well worth watching, by the way, and I've read some of the material in the press marking the 50 years. One thing that doesn't sit quite right with me is some of Friedkin's working methods on the film. It's now widely known that he could be a very difficult person to work for. We're much more aware of bullying in the workplace now. And I don't think it's acceptable for a director to bully actors, even if it does result in great work. Of course, this isn't a critique of the film, but rather of the methods used in making the film. Apparently, to get genuine reactions on film, he slapped one of the actors. This was one of the priest that gives the last rites at the end of the film. And he explains how we see in the film his hand shaking. That wasn't acting, he was really shaking from having been slapped. And Friedkin startled other actors by randomly firing guns on set. Perhaps this does get a great result, but I think that great actors don't need to be manipulated in this way. The most disturbing thing for me was that the young actress who played Reagan didn't know what masturbation was, so the knife masturbation scene feels really troubling for me. I don't think it's right to have a child do something so unpleasant without complete consent. In the documentary, we see her talking about it as an adult, and it didn't seem to be traumatic for her. She said she just followed the instructions, but something about this just leaves me feeling a little bit uneasy. So there we are, an epic review for an epic film. This is just one of those unmissable classics. I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.